The world's grumpiest retired K9 wanted nothing to do with anyone. Not humans, not animals, not even life itself. So when two wild bobcat kittens crawled onto his back and then refused to ever get off, everyone braced for disaster. But instead of snarling, he stood up and walked straight into a decision that would change all three of their lives forever. And here's the part no one can explain. The moment the storm hit and the kittens screamed, he did something no grieving dog should have been capable of. Bruno had never asked for peace, but he certainly believed he deserved it. On this particular late autumn morning at the Rocky Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Colorado, the big Rottweiler, broad-shouldered, scar-marked, face permanently arranged into an expression of "don't test me," had chosen a sunny patch of grass as his throne. Unfortunately for him, his throne happened to be occupied. One small bobcat dangled from his ear like an oversized earring, and another lay draped across his muzzle as if he were nothing more than a heated mattress. Milo, the male bobcat, was a streak of spotted chaos, barely 5 months old. He clung to Bruno's left ear with the confidence of someone who believed gravity was an optional concept. His hind legs paddled in the air as he tried to gain leverage, slipping, readjusting, and climbing again with the determination of a miniature mountaineer. Bruno's ear, large, triangular, and normally quite expressive, was stretched to the point that any reasonable dog might have snapped. Bruno, however, simply closed his eyes harder. Nova, the quieter of the two, had taken possession of Bruno's face. She was curled in a perfect crescent across his nose, golden eyes half closed, her tail flicking rhythmically each time Bruno exhaled. Her whiskers tickled his muzzle. Her little chest rose and fell in peaceful sleep, each breath synced with his like she'd been doing it all her life. Bruno did not move. Not a twitch. Not a growl. Not even the low rumble he sometimes used to warn the younger K9s to keep their distance. He simply lay there, a monument of canine patience, or perhaps a monument of permanent resignation, while the two wild kittens treated him like playground equipment. If anyone walking past the enclosure didn't know better, they would have assumed Bruno was the world's gentlest dog. Anyone who knew him, though, would have recognized that expression instantly. It read, "I hate this. I absolutely hate this, and somehow, this is my life." Dr. Hannah Lee stood behind the observation glass inside the center's main building, watching the spectacle unfold with a hand pressed against her forehead. Even after months of seeing them together, the scene still made her question every decision she'd ever made in her veterinary career. A giant Rottweiler with a reputation for being the grumpiest retired K9 in Colorado, voluntarily letting two bobcat juveniles turn him into an obstacle course? Every training manual, every wildlife regulation handbook, every behavioral guideline said this should not be possible. Yet here they were. And what made the moment even more unbelievable, even surreal, was that no more than 6 months ago, this same dog had been ready to die, quietly, slowly, without a single sign of resistance. Bruno exhaled one of his signature sighs, the kind so long and dramatic that the staff joked it could power the wind turbines on the hill above the rehabilitation center. The sigh ruffled Nova's fur. She stirred, blinked, stretched her paws forward, and without warning smacked Bruno's nose with a soft but confident bap. Then she hopped off his face like a spring-loaded toy and darted across the enclosure. Milo, abandoning the oar he had nearly conquered, dropped to the ground and sprinted after her, the two of them disappearing behind a patch of tall grass. Bruno opened one eye. Just one. It was the look of a father who had not asked for children, did not understand children, but had somehow become responsible for the two most chaotic ones in the Tri-County area. Slowly, painfully slowly, he hauled himself up and followed them with the heavy gait of someone who wanted nothing more than for just one morning to go according to his plan. It never did. The staff joked that Bruno didn't walk after the bobcats. He accepted his fate and moved in its general direction. But behind the humor, Behind the absurdity of seeing two bobcats torment a hardened rescue K9, there was something deeper under the surface, something unspoken, something no visitor could guess by looking at this unlikely trio. Because while the center's volunteers often laughed and filmed short clips to share among themselves, only a few people truly understood the weight of what they were witnessing. The most broken heart on the property, the one that had once refused food, refused touch, refused life, belonged to the same dog now letting bobcats nap on his face. And none of the new visitors, families or curious hikers who stopped by the center's educational overlook would ever imagine that 6 months earlier, Bruno had been so far gone that Hannah had sat alone in her office, staring at the euthanasia authorization form with shaking hands. But that part of the story would come later. For now, all anyone could see was a grumpy, broad-chested dog trudging after two tiny wildcats who clearly had no idea he was supposed to be intimidating. A few yards away, a pair of older tourists watched through the viewing window. The husband squinted and asked, "Honey, is that dog okay? He looks miserable." The wife laughed. "He looks like every grandfather dragged to babysit on a Sunday morning." Hannah overheard them and smiled, though her eyes softened. "He's better than okay," she murmured. "You have no idea." And truly, they didn't. Outside, Nova had leapt onto a low tree stump and was chirping at Milo, demanding he attempt the jump she had just mastered. Milo, always eager to prove himself, wiggled his hindquarters, preparing to launch. Bruno stopped beside them and gave a single grunt, a sound Hannah and the staff had come to recognize as his attempt at, "Please, for the love of everything, calm down." The kittens ignored him. Of course they did. Bruno sat down with another exhausted huff, his posture regal in the way only a miserable yet responsible adult could manage. This unusual little family, this comedic chaos layered over a history of heartbreak, was just beginning its story. A story no one could have predicted. A story that changed not only their lives, but the lives of people who would come to learn about them. And if the viewer watching this unfolding tale felt compelled to stay, to witness each unlikely turn, then maybe they were already part of something bigger. If you're still with us, you're part of a remarkable community here at Whispering Hearts, where real stories of extraordinary animal connections come to life. Every subscriber helps us share more heart-touching moments that reveal the power of compassion across species. Don't forget to hit subscribe, because the journey ahead is one you'll feel long after the story ends. Bruno shifted his weight, eyes half-lidded, as Milo launched himself too short of the stump and face-planted directly into Bruno's side. Nova chirped triumphantly. Bruno did not react. Somewhere inside that stoic chest, however, something warm flickered, something no one would have believed only months before. This was more than irritation, more than comedy, more than a strange interspecies arrangement. This was the first chapter of how a broken heart found its reason to beat again. Bruno hadn't always been the grumpy king dragged unwillingly into fatherhood by two wild kittens. 6 months earlier, he had been something entirely different, sharp, disciplined, and unwavering in purpose. Back then, he belonged to the Urban Search and Rescue Unit in Denver, a division known for going into the kinds of places most people ran away from. And among that team of dogs trained for rubble, smoke, and confined spaces, Bruno had been the one they relied on when things were at their worst. He was partnered with Ethan Cole, a firefighter with quick hands, quicker humor, and a habit of calling Bruno Big Man, even though Bruno outweighed him only by a dozen pounds. Ethan had a way of laughing at danger without disrespecting it. The team used to say the two of them moved like a single organism. Ethan giving soft, precise commands, and Bruno executing each one with absolute trust. Their bond was the kind forged under collapsed roofs and burning stairwells, steadied by 1,000 moments when one depended on the other to make the right decision. The last time they worked together was the night of the warehouse collapse. A gas leak beneath an old storage building on the edge of the city had triggered an explosion, sending sheet metal and concrete flying across the lot. By the time the rescue crew arrived, sections of the roof were sinking, and thin plumes of dust swirled in the air like smoke-tinted fog. Ethan slipped on his helmet, fastened Bruno's harness, and together they moved inside with the quiet efficiency of a team that had done this far too many times. They found the first survivor pinned beneath a fractured beam. Ethan radioed for extraction. Bruno circled the man twice, then sat beside Ethan's knee the way he always did while waiting for the paramedics. The second survivor was deeper in, somewhere beyond a wall of partially collapsed shelving. Bruno smelled him first, lifted his head sharply, tugged forward, and Ethan followed. They reached a doorway just as another vibration shuddered through the floor. Bruno went in. Ethan went after him. A minute later, the ceiling came down. When the dust settled, rescue teams pulled Bruno out from under a slanted section of sheet metal. He was bruised, winded, shaken, but alive. He kept pulling toward the hole where Ethan had disappeared, digging in frantic bursts until firefighters held him back. Hours passed. Excavators arrived. Floodlights lit the rubble. But the radios eventually went quiet, and one by one, helmets bowed. Ethan Cole was gone. From that moment, Bruno changed. The drive that once made him unstoppable now anchored him in grief so heavy it pulled him under. When he arrived at the Rocky Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center the next morning, Hannah knew immediately something was different about him. Not physically, but in the hollow look in his eyes. Working dogs mourn differently from house pets. Their losses are tied to identity, to purpose. When their partner dies in the line of duty, their world doesn't simply dim, it collapses. For days, Bruno refused all food. Staff placed bowls near him, changed the water, added warm broth, tried different proteins. He didn't touch a single bite. He lay with his back to the gate, head down, muscles slack. When handlers spoke his name, his ears didn't flick. When they tried to encourage him to stand, he went limp. He was breathing, but he wasn't living. Hannah tried everything she had used successfully on other traumatized K9’s. Anti-anxiety medication, antidepressants, slowly paced exposure to familiar routines. Even recordings of Ethan's voice, recovered from radio transmissions and training sessions. But instead of comforting him, the sound made his chest rise in one long breath of agony. He stood, walked to the speaker, pressed his nose to it, and then lay down again with a quiet, low moan that hollowed out the hearts of everyone who heard it. The next week, Bruno stopped responding altogether. He didn't lift his head, didn't turn when staff entered his enclosure, didn't even seem aware of the world around him. Grief had carved him into a shell, a dog waiting not for rescue, but for release. 2 weeks later, the weight loss became severe. 18 pounds vanished from his frame, his coat dulled, his breathing slowed. At night, instead of sleeping, he simply stared at the gate until his eyes drifted closed from exhaustion. He wasn't waiting for food, affection, or comfort. He was waiting for Ethan. Hannah consulted specialists across 3 states, behaviorists, trauma experts, K9 unit veterans. They all said the same thing. Without a restored sense of purpose, Bruno would likely fade beyond recovery. Dogs like him don't just lose a partner, one expert told her. They lose the reason they believe they exist. And this time, purpose could not be restored with training exercises or routine. The partner he had trusted with his life was gone. Around the 5th week, Hannah found herself in her small office at 2 a.m, staring at the euthanasia authorization form she'd avoided for days. She set the pen down, picked it up, set it down again. She wasn't a woman prone to tears, but that night they came without force. Bruno wasn't suffering because of physical pain. He was dying of a broken heart, a kind of death she had never learned to treat in veterinary school. She told herself she was ending his suffering, not his life. But the words didn't feel true. For nearly an hour, she stared at the line where her signature would go. A storm outside blew snow against the windows. The heater hummed. Somewhere in the main building, a recuperating red-tailed hawk clicked its beak against the bars of its enclosure, but Hannah heard none of it. She heard only silence, the kind a grieving dog made when he'd run out of the strength to cry. Eventually, she set the pen aside. "Not yet," she whispered. "Not tonight." She gave herself 48 more hours, 2 days to see if something, anything shifted. A sign, a spark, even a flicker. She didn't know then that the spark was already on its way, not in the form of therapy, medication, or structured rehabilitation, but in the shape of 2 shivering bobcat kittens being driven through a snowstorm toward the center, their cries so small and frightened they barely registered over the wind. By the time Hannah learned about them, it was already too late to turn them away, and even if she had known what placing them in Bruno's enclosure would lead to, she never could have imagined the choice she was about to make, the choice that would crack open the grief-filled shell Bruno had built around himself, a choice that would save all 3 of their lives. The storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. By late afternoon, the foothills of Colorado were already buried under white, and the wind had begun to howl against the metal siding of the Rocky Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Inside, heaters hummed, lights flickered, and the staff moved with the tense energy that came with bad weather and too many fragile animals depending on them. Hannah was tending to a recovering fox kit when her radio crackled to life. "Dr. Lee, this is Wildlife Officer Grant. I'm en route with 2 injured juveniles, bobcats. Found them near Highway 62. They're in bad shape, hypothermic, possibly dehydrated. Mother didn't make it. ETA 12 minutes. The room seemed to still around her. Bobcat kittens were difficult even under ideal conditions. Frightened, wild, and in desperate need of controlled warmth. But in a storm like this, their odds dropped sharply. "Grant," she replied, already pulling on a heavier coat. "Every incubator we have is full. We're overflowing." "I know," he said, the wind battering his voice. "But if we don't get them somewhere warm in the next hour, they won't make it." Hannah didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She simply said, "Bring them." Minutes later, the wildlife truck slid into the parking lot, snow whipping behind it. Grant stepped out, his cheeks red from windburn, cradling a small carrier lined with blankets that were already damp. Inside, huddled together in a trembling knot of spotted fur, were the 2 kittens. The little male was louder, crying sharp, panicked mews as if trying to claw his way back to the world he'd known only that morning. The female was quieter, her breaths shallow, her body almost limp. Hannah felt her stomach tighten. Kittens this young, in cold this severe, could fade faster than anyone realized. She moved quickly, checking vitals, touching cold paws, feeling their frail ribs beneath fur that should have been thickening for winter. 2 pounds each, she murmured. Maybe 8, 9 weeks old. They won't last long without full heat support. Behind her, Technician James hovered, arms crossed. "We're full, Hannah. The incubators are taken. The small mammal wing is at capacity." "I know," she said, wrapping the kittens again. "But we don't have another option." James hesitated. "We could call Ridgeview Sanctuary." They closed early because of the storm. She kept moving, thinking, calculating. These 2 won't survive another transport. She brought the kittens inside, heading toward the back hallway where the temperature stayed the most stable. She passed the observation window overlooking Bruno's enclosure. The big Rottweiler was in the same place he'd been all week, lying near the gate, his back to the world, as still as the snow collecting along the fence. And then something clicked in her mind. A wild idea, a desperate one, a reckless one. The largest enclosure at the center was Bruno's, Nearly half an acre of sheltered space, complete with heated lamps built for working dogs that couldn't regulate temperature after injury. It had dry ground, a wind-blocked corner, and enough distance between animals that the kittens wouldn't feel crowded. Bruno hadn't moved more than a few feet in days. He wasn't eating, wasn't responding, wasn't interacting with anything. He wouldn't even notice them. James noticed her staring through the glass. "Don't even think about it," he warned. "I'm out of options," she said quietly. "He's a grieving K9, Hannah, not a babysitter, and they're wild cats. If he snaps..." "He won't," she said, but her voice held more hope than certainty. "And if we do nothing, these kittens will die tonight." The argument ended not because they agreed, but because survival didn't allow hesitation. Hannah prepped a heated nesting box, soft blankets, a controlled temp pad, a small opening the kittens could crawl through. She placed both bobcats inside, their tiny bodies curling instinctively into the warmth. Then she took a breath, gathered her courage, and walked toward Bruno's enclosure. The moment she entered, Bruno didn't even lift his head. Snow clung to the edges of the fence, and the wind pressed faint groans out of the shelter beams. She set the nesting box in the far corner beneath the heat lamps, 50 feet from Bruno, and checked the temperature one more time. Milo cried weakly from inside the box. Nova barely stirred. Bruno didn't react. Hannah stepped out, closed the gate, and returned to the monitoring room. She pulled up the enclosure cameras. 4 angles, overlapping views of the shelter, the open yard, and Bruno's immobile form. She pulled a chair close, wrapped her hands around a mug of tea she wouldn't remember drinking, and began the long vigil. Hours crawled. The storm worsened. Snow slammed against the enclosure roof in sheets. The kittens cried, thin, frightened, heartbreaking sounds that carried even through the insulated glass. Every 2 hours, Hannah bundled up and entered the enclosure to bottle feed them. Bruno never turned his head. He didn't flinch when she stepped close to him, didn't sniff the air, didn't give any sign that 2 new lives had been placed within his world. By midnight, exhaustion had settled into her bones, and the dread she'd kept at bay began creeping back. The kittens were unstable. Bruno was nearly unresponsive. She had taken a risk that might cost 3 lives instead of 2. The storm thundered harder. At 2:43 a.m., a violent gust rattled the roof so loudly the cameras shook. Snow burst through the open side of the shelter, blowing directly against the nesting box. Milo's cry cut through the speakers, sharper, more frantic than before. Nova followed with a distressed, broken sound. Then, for the first time in weeks, Bruno moved. Not gradually, not as a stretch or reflex. He lifted his head with purpose. Hannah sat up straight, heart hammering. On the screen, Bruno turned, his gaze locking onto the source of the cries, his ears tilted forward, his muscles tightened, not with aggression, but with alertness. A second cry from the kittens pierced the storm. Bruno stood. It was a slow rise, stiff and heavy, as if waking from underwater. But once on his feet, he walked with steady, determined steps straight toward the pure shelter corner. Snow blew into his face. He didn't stop. He reached the nesting box, lowered his massive head, and examined the panicked kittens inside. Hannah covered her mouth with her hand. Bruno then gripped the edge of the box carefully with his jaws and dragged it deeper beneath the shelter, away from the wind. He positioned it against the back wall, blocking the rest of the snow with his own body. Then he lay down beside it, chest pressed to the wooden frame, the warmth of his breath drifting through the small opening. The kittens' cries softened, then quieted, then faded into sleep. Hannah blinked hard. On the screen, Bruno stayed motionless, awake, eyes fixed outward. Not in grief, but in vigilance. A protector again. In that moment, something in the center of the storm, inside the shelter, inside the box, inside Bruno himself, shifted. He wasn't gone. Not entirely. Not anymore. By dawn, the storm had settled into a quiet, steady snowfall, the kind that muted the world into pale shades of gray and white. The wind had calmed. The trees stood stiff and heavy with ice, and the Rocky Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center seemed to exhale after a night that could have gone very differently. Hannah walked toward Bruno's enclosure with a mixture of hope and fear tightening in her chest. She had watched the monitors for hours. Watching something unfold she still wasn't entirely convinced she hadn't imagined. The gate creaked as she pushed it open. Her boots broke through the thin crust of morning frost. She expected to see the nesting box where Bruno had dragged it. Safe, warm, tucked against the inner wall of the shelter. What she didn't expect was what waited beside it. The kittens were not inside the box. They were on Bruno. Milo lay curled against the broad curve of Bruno's belly, paws tucked beneath him, tail flicking lightly as he slept. Nova, smaller and quieter but no less wild, was stretched across Bruno's foreleg, her chin against his paw as though claiming her own pillow. Both kittens breathed in slow, steady waves, their faces relaxed, their tiny ears twitching in dreams. Bruno was awake, not tense, not empty, awake. His head rested on the ground, his gaze following Hannah as she stepped inside. There was a watchfulness there, something soft but guarded, as if he were trying to say, "I'm here, and they're mine now." For a moment, Hannah didn't move. The cold stung her cheeks, but she barely felt it. She stepped slowly toward them, kneeling just far enough away not to disturb the kittens. "Good morning," she murmured to Bruno, though her voice trembled. "You had quite a night." Bruno blinked once, the slow, deliberate kind of blink that felt almost like an acknowledgement. Then he looked back down at the kittens, lowering his nose just slightly to breathe in their scent. A small puff of warm air stirred Nova's fur, making her sigh in her sleep. It wasn't instinct that had driven him to protect them. Instinct could have made him curious, or cautious, or indifferent, but this gentle, careful presence belonged to a part of Bruno she'd feared was gone forever. As she watched, Milo stirred, his paws stretched, claws gently unfurling. He yawned so wide his tiny jaw trembled and then climbed. Not onto the blankets, not toward the shelter, but up Bruno's ribs, flopping onto the Rottweiler's side with a soft thump. Bruno did not flinch. He merely exhaled, a long sigh that once would have signaled irritation, but now carried something else. Something alive. It was, astonishingly, patience. James approached from behind, his voice lowered. "You seeing this?" Hannah nodded but didn't take her eyes off Bruno. He kept them alive through the storm, dragged the box on his own, guarded them all night. James let out a slow breath. "Well, that's not exactly in the textbook." "No," she said softly. "It isn't." The kittens began to stir fully, stretching and rolling, batting softly at the fur on Bruno's shoulder. Nova climbed up toward his neck, her claws catching gently on his coat, while Milo attempted to wedge himself between Bruno's forelegs. Both were determined to claim as much warmth as possible, and both seemed oblivious to the magnitude of the creature beneath them. Bruno shifted only enough to ensure they didn't fall. It was an instinctive adjustment, protective, steady, intentional. Something had awakened in him. Not joy, not yet, but purpose, raw, instinctive, familiar. The kind that had driven him into collapsing buildings at Ethan's side, the kind that made him push forward when others faltered. These kittens didn't need a search and rescue dog. They needed a guardian. And somewhere in the storm, that old part of him had risen from the darkness. Hannah swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "I think," she whispered, "he chose them." For the rest of the morning, she observed quietly from the gates as the kittens tested their new world. When she stepped in to feed them with warmed formula, Bruno watched closely, following every movement of her hands. Not with suspicion, but with a measured care she hadn't seen from him since before the warehouse collapse. He waited until the kittens had eaten. Only when they settled again did he approach his own bowl and take a few bites. A small victory, but a miraculous one. By noon, the storm clouds parted, leaving the enclosure bathed in sharp winter sunlight. For the first time in the longest stretch of his life, Bruno stepped away from the gate, the place he had clung to in grief, and followed the bobcats as they toddled unsteadily through the snow. Nova pounced on a tuft of grass, peeking through the frost. Milo chased a drifting leaf, and Bruno walked behind them like an exhausted guardian who had forgotten how to rest. At one point, the kittens wandered too close to the low incline near the stream. It wasn't deep, but the ice along the edges wasn't stable. Bruno moved faster this time, not running, but nearly, and placed himself between them and the water. He gave a short, deep grunt. Both bobcats froze, ears perked, then turned back toward him. They didn't understand the danger, but they understood him. James watched from the fence. "He just told them no, didn't he?" "He did," Hannah replied. And they listened. That afternoon, Hannah reviewed the camera footage from the night before. She watched the storm rage, watched the kittens cry in terror, watched Bruno rise for the first time in weeks. She watched him push against the wind, drag the box, lie beside it like a living barrier between the storm and the helpless. She stopped the footage at the moment when the kittens pressed themselves against Bruno's chest, their shaking easing as his warmth enveloped them. "He refused to survive," she whispered, "until someone needed him." Purpose, she understood now, wasn't something you forced into a dog like Bruno. It was something that had to find him, something that had to take root on its own. And through some improbable twist of fate, two wild kittens, vulnerable, frightened, motherless, had done what all her training and experience could not. They had given him someone to live for. By evening, the kittens had regained enough energy to play, pouncing at Bruno's tail as though it were the world's most patient snake. He tolerated exactly 1 minute of this before letting out a long, theatrical groan and lowering himself into a sphinx-like pose. Nova climbed onto his head. Milo curled beside his leg. Bruno closed his eyes, but the tension that once lived in his muscles was gone. He wasn't healed, not fully. The grief was still part of him, but now something else was too, and it was beginning to win. In the days following the storm, something remarkable took hold inside Bruno's enclosure. Something so subtle at first that the staff barely dared name it. Hannah noticed it early one morning when she arrived before sunrise. She stepped quietly toward the viewing window, still holding her coffee, and found a sight she never expected to witness again in her career. Bruno asleep, not alone in a corner, but with two small bobcats pressed firmly against him, as if they belonged there. Nova was sprawled across his foreleg, one paw draped over his wrist. Milo lay curled between Bruno's massive front legs, his small chest lifting and falling in the slow rhythm of deep sleep. And Bruno, stoic, stubborn, perpetually irritated Bruno, looked almost peaceful. His breathing was steady, his eyes soft even in rest. For the first time since Ethan's death, the tension in his shoulders seemed to have melted. When Hannah quietly opened the gate to feed the kittens their morning formula, Bruno's eyes snapped open. Not in alarm, but in assessment. He watched every movement she made. When she knelt, he shifted slightly, not to move away, but to make room, as if making sure she didn't jostle the bobcats unnecessarily. Nova blinked slowly up at him, yawned, then climbed clumsily into Hannah's lap to drink from the bottle. Milo followed, though not before giving Bruno's ear a confident nudge as if to say, "You stay right there. I'll be back." After feeding, the kittens attempted to play, wobbling across the frost-dusted grass like uncoordinated acrobats. Bruno stood, a joint stiff from disuse, and walked after them. His steps were deliberate, protective. When Milo strayed too close to the outer fence, Bruno made a low guttural sound. Just once. The kitten paused, reconsidered, then bounded back toward him. A command delivered perfectly. A command understood. The staff watched with the kind of quiet amazement normally reserved for miracles. Bruno wasn't just tolerating the bobcats. He was regulating them. He was correcting them gently, guiding their movement, managing their safety. These behaviors weren't random. They were remnants of his training, reshaped by instinct. He wasn't a search and rescue dog anymore. He was becoming something else entirely. Later that afternoon, Lily, the teenage volunteer who'd been helping social media outreach for the center, walked past the enclosure and stopped short. Nova had climbed directly onto Bruno's head and was perched there like a furry crown. Milo, meanwhile, hung from Bruno's tail, swinging back and forth with wild enthusiasm. Bruno didn't snap, didn't move. He merely widened his eyes in a way that perfectly communicated, "I'm trapped in a nightmare of my own creation." Lily burst into laughter. She lifted her phone and started recording, whispering, "This is gold, absolute gold." But she didn't post anything yet. Something about the moment felt too private, too tender. She saved the clip and kept walking. Inside the main building, James watched from the monitoring screens. "They're using him like he's playground equipment," he muttered. "If that were any other dog." "It's not," Hannah said. She had her arms crossed, eyes on Bruno. "He's found a new identity, whether he wanted to or not." James shook his head. "He's still grieving. This could all go wrong." "Or," Hannah countered softly, "it could be the thing that saves him." By the end of the week, Bruno settled into a routine he had never agreed to, but carried out with the resignation of a creature who had accepted his fate. Every morning, the kittens ambushed him before he could take more than a few steps. Milo pounced on his shoulders, or tried. Sometimes he collided with Bruno's side and tumbled into the grass. Nova perfected a different tactic. She climbed onto Bruno's muzzle, stretched luxuriously, and went limp, refusing to move. The staff dubbed it her face claim, and it became a recurring event. Bruno responded the same way each time. A slow blink, a sigh so deep it trembled through his chest, and the faintest slump of his posture that communicated total emotional surrender. Yet beneath that reluctant acceptance, he watched them constantly. When Milo chased a leaf too close to the rocky edge of the enclosure, Bruno moved in front of him. When Nova attempted to scale the low tree, Bruno stood at its base, ready to catch her if she slipped. When the wind gusted strong enough to rattle branches, he brought them back toward the shelter with a short bark that carried the weight of authority. He was teaching them boundaries. They were teaching him to live again. A few days later, during a quiet afternoon, Hannah observed something even more striking. Milo had discovered a loose patch of frost near the stream and began pawing at it, testing its stability. Before Hannah could react, the ice cracked. Milo slipped, his paws skidding dangerously close to the edge. Bruno was at his side in an instant, teeth gripping the scruff of Milo's neck, not harshly, but firmly enough to pull him back. Milo froze. Nova, sensing panic, chirped anxiously. Bruno released Milo the moment they were safe, then touched his nose to the kitten's head in a brief, reassuring gesture. It was discipline. It was affection. It was unmistakably paternal. By the second week, the center's atmosphere changed. Staff moved with lighter steps. The tension that had hovered since Bruno's arrival began to ease. Even the animals in nearby enclosures seemed calmer, as if the shift in Bruno's energy radiated outward. Grief had once pressed on him like a shadow that consumed everything it touched. Now, a small warmth was beginning to replace it, but the biggest shift came unexpectedly. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long golden beams across the snow, Bruno began to eat. Truly eat. Not nibble, not pick. He finished half a bowl, then another. Every bite came after Milo, and Nova had sniffed his food first, a ritual they invented and one Bruno tolerated with theatrical annoyance. Hannah stood silent, watching from the gate, tears pricking at her eyes. "Welcome back," she whispered. As the day dimmed, Nova curled on Bruno's back. Milo settled between his paws. The wind rustled the bare branches above them, and for the first time since Ethan's death, Bruno lowered his head not in sorrow, but in rest. He wasn't healed, he wasn't whole, but he was no longer fading. With every playful smack of Nova's paw, with every goofy tumble from Milo, with every exasperated sigh that rumbled through his chest, he was becoming something he'd never expected, a reluctant father. And the two little menaces who refused to leave him alone were slowly stitching his broken heart back together, one annoying moment at a time. Spring arrived late in the Rockies that year, creeping in cautiously as if unsure it was welcome after the brutal winter storm that had nearly taken the Bobcat Kittens' lives. The snow thinned, the air softened, and tiny green shoots pushed up through the ground inside Bruno's enclosure. With warmer days came more chaos, because Milo and Nova were no longer fragile, shivering bundles of fur. They had grown, and with growth came trouble. By early April, the kittens weighed nearly 8 pounds each. Their baby wobble had vanished, replaced with the fluid, calculated grace of young predators discovering what their bodies were capable of. They could jump higher, run faster, climb nearly anything, and pounce with startling accuracy. The staff quickly learned that bobcat adolescence was less a developmental stage and more a natural disaster. And Bruno bore the brunt of it. One bright morning, Hannah arrived early to check the enclosures. The air carried the crisp scent of thawing pine needles. The sky glowed pale blue. And coming from Bruno's pen was the unmistakable sound of chaos, thumps, scrapes, and one long guttural groan that belonged to a dog questioning every life choice that led him to this moment. Hannah hurried over. There, at the center of the enclosure, Bruno lay flat on the ground with the exhaustion of a retired soldier forced into babysitting duty. Milo clung to Bruno's tail like he was riding a bucking bronco. Nova, meanwhile, had launched herself onto Bruno's face, again sprawled across his muzzle like a smug queen claiming her throne. The moment she spotted Hannah, she chirped triumphantly as if asking, "Do you see how well I'm managing him?" Bruno's eyes flicked upward, pleading for divine intervention, but the deeper truth beneath the comedy was unmistakable. Bruno was alive in ways he hadn't been since Ethan's passing. He watched the kittens constantly, responded to their needs, corrected their misbehavior, and, though he'd never admit it, sought them out when he woke from uneasy sleep. Where grief had once kept him anchored in place, responsibility now kept him moving. That responsibility would soon be tested. 3 weeks later, the kittens entered what wildlife experts affectionately called the reckless stage. Their confidence soared faster than their coordination, and their curiosity expanded beyond their survival instincts. Milo's climbing skills improved dramatically, and he decided the top of the shelter beam was his new territory. Nova developed a hunting style that the staff described as "fling herself first, think later." Bruno adapted to each new hazard with stoic patience, positioning himself beneath branches, blocking paths to unstable rocks, deflecting leaps that might lead to injury. He issued low warning rumbles when they pushed limits too far. And to everyone's surprise, the kittens obeyed him more consistently than they obeyed the humans who fed them. "They've imprinted on him," James said as he observed from the viewing window. "He's not just a guardian, he's their anchor." Hannah nodded, "And they're his." The day everything changed began like any other. Sunlight, warming the enclosure, birds chattering from the treetops, and the kittens chasing each other in reckless circles. Bruno rested in his usual place near the shade, keeping a watchful eye on their antics. The staff was giving a small tour to a group of veterinary interns, all of whom were fascinated by this unlikely trio. The kittens sprinted past Bruno, Milo in the lead, Nova close behind. They circled the trees, darted through a gap in the brush, and lunged back toward their adoptive father. Bruno simply exhaled, lowering his head onto his paws. Then it happened. Nova misjudged her speed. She attempted to brake, pivot, and leap, but her back paws slipped in the loose dirt. Instead of veering left, she launched sideways and crashed directly into Bruno's muzzle. Her claws, still sharp and growing daily, scraped across his nose in a quick, accidental rake of instinctive panic. The sound that followed froze everyone. Bruno went completely still. The interns stopped whispering. James stiffened beside Hannah. Even Milo paused mid-stride, his ears flattening. Nova landed awkwardly on the ground, spinning to a halt. Her eyes widened as she realized what she'd done. The shift in her body language was instantaneous. Ears back, tail low, a soft, uncertain mew escaping her throat. It was an apology in the only language she knew. Bruno's chest rose slowly. His breath left him in a tight exhale. Blood beaded along the cut on his muzzle, bright against the dark fur. Every person watching held their breath. A trained K9 like Bruno knew how to respond to threats. He'd been taught to react quickly, with control, but with force when necessary. Even in retirement, those instincts remained buried beneath the surface. An injury, especially one near his face, could trigger a defensive reflex. Nova took one trembling step toward him. Bruno lowered his head. Nova crept closer. The staff inched forward, hearts pounding, and then Bruno touched his nose gently to the top of Nova's head, a single, slow gesture. Reassurance, forgiveness, family. Nova pressed herself against his chest, trembling. Milo, sensing the all clear, ran over and curled up beside his sister, nudging her as if asking if she was all right. The enclosure grew remarkably silent. One of the interns whispered, I've never seen anything like that." James exhaled for the first time in nearly 20 seconds. "That," he said softly, "is trust, from both sides." But the moment carried something deeper than trust. It was a turning point, a proof that their bond wasn't dependent on calm days and easy routines. It held under fear, it held under pain, it held under instinct. After that day, Bruno's role shifted again, from protector to true parent. He corrected firmly when needed, comforted consistently, watched tirelessly. Nova stopped climbing onto his face quite as often, though not entirely, and Milo took fewer risks near the stream. But perhaps the biggest change was in Bruno himself. His steps grew more confident. His eating returned to normal. At night, instead of curling alone in the corner of the enclosure, he allowed the kittens to burrow against him without protest. The scar on his muzzle healed, but the lesson it carried remained written in the small family's rhythm. Trust isn't trust until it survives being tested. And theirs had survived. By midsummer, the Rockies had turned gold and green, the air warm enough to coax even the laziest animals into long afternoon naps. Inside his enclosure, Bruno had finally settled into a predictable routine, or as predictable as life could be with two adolescent bobcats who treated every day like a new opportunity for mayhem. Milo had mastered tree climbing and now used the lower branches as lookout posts from which to ambush Bruno. Nova continued her lifelong mission to conquer Bruno's face, claiming it during naps as though it were prime real estate. And Bruno, well, he had reached a level of resigned acceptance that bordered on zen. He still groaned dramatically every time one of the kittens pounced on him, but the old emptiness was gone. His eyes now held a steady, quiet warmth, even when Nova flattened his ear or Milo dangled from his tail. He wasn't just alive, he was living. But life has a way of testing the things we love most. and that test came in late July, carried on hot, dry winds that blew down from the higher ridges. The lightning struck just after noon, a single jagged spear tearing through the sky and hitting a patch of tinder-dry brush in the state forest 12 miles away. No one at the Wildlife Center noticed immediately. Fires that started high in the forest often fizzled out on their own, but this one didn't. By early evening, the sky had darkened to a strange copper haze. A faint smell of smoke drifted across the property. Hannah stepped outside, sniffed the air, and felt a heavy knot settle in her stomach. Smoke that strong meant one thing: the fire was moving fast. An hour later, the emergency alert buzzed across every phone in the county. Mandatory evacuation. Order projected fire path. Rocky Ridge corridor. Evacuate within 3 hours. Panic erupted inside the center. Staff sprinted through hallways, grabbing carriers, loading medical supplies, preparing sedatives, checking transport vans. Injured foxes were crated. A recovering eagle was covered and secured. A pair of young raccoons were wrangled into their travel enclosure with mild protest. The noise grew into a frantic symphony, slamming doors, shouted instructions, the distress calls of animals sensing danger. Meanwhile, Bruno's enclosure sat quiet under the smoky sky. Hannah reached him last, her arms full of 2 medium carriers and a heavy-duty crate large enough to transport a dog Bruno's size. He stood near the center of the enclosure, ears flicking at the unusual tension in the air. Milo and Nova crouched close to him, their bodies low, eyes bright and wary. "Hey, big guy," Hannah said softly as she entered. "We don't have much time." Bruno stepped forward willingly, but the kittens bolted. Milo shot toward the shelter roof. Nova slipped into the brush. Both were wild enough to fear confinement, young enough to react purely on instinct. Hannah's heart pounded. No, not now. The fire was already visible in the distance, a glowing smear along the ridge. They had maybe 90 minutes left. James sprinted toward her. "We'll never catch them. They're too fast." "We can't leave them," she said, her voice breaking. "We won't," he insisted. "But Hannah, think. How do you contain 2 half-grown bobcats who've never been crated a day in their lives?" Her gaze shifted to Bruno. Milo perched on a branch 15 feet away. Nova peeked from behind a rock. Their bodies trembled, torn between instinct and the one bond stronger than fear. "Bruno," Hannah whispered. "He's the only one they'll listen to." She hurried to the transport van and secured Bruno's crate inside. The door stayed open. The ramp lay flat on the ground. It was the only chance they had. Then she turned back to Bruno and said one word, the word Ethan had used thousands of times. "Come." Bruno stepped out of the enclosure and walked straight into the crate. No hesitation, no fear. He turned around slowly, settling his massive body inside, and stared back toward the gate. Then he barked. Not loud, not warning. A low, urgent command, the kind that carried meaning deeper than language. Milo froze on the branch. Nova lifted her head. Bruno barked again. A pulse of instinct shot through the kittens. They leapt from their hiding places at the same moment, 2 streaks of spotted fur racing toward the van. Milo reached the ramp first, skidding slightly, then scrambled inside the crate. Nova followed, trembling so hard her legs shook. She pressed herself against Bruno's ribs, eyes wide, breath sharp. Bruno lowered his head over them like a shield. Hannah's hands shook as she closed the crate door and secured the latches. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to stop the tears welling in her eyes. Within minutes, the van was rolling down the mountain roads, smoke thickening behind them. Traffic from other evacuees crawled forward, and the fire glowed brighter each time they crested a hill. Bruno lay still the entire ride, his body forming a wall of warmth around the kittens. Milo buried his face in Bruno's chest fur. Nova tucked herself beneath his chin, An entire county was fleeing the fire. But inside that crate, they were calm. 3 days passed at the emergency shelter, a chaotic fairground filled with livestock trailers, injured animals, confused pets, and exhausted handlers. The air buzzed constantly with generators, distant sirens, and the low hum of anxious voices. But the trio remained steady. Bruno barely moved from his resting place. Milo and Nova refused to step more than a foot away from him. When nearby dogs barked or cattle bellowed, Bruno extended one paw toward the kittens, pulling them close. Other evacuees noticed. A retired firefighter passing by stopped and murmured, "I've seen a lot in my years, but never that." A mother with 2 young children whispered, "Look how safe they feel. They're family." And Hannah, every time she checked on them, felt something tighten deep inside her chest. A realization that this bond wasn't just unusual, it was unbreakable. When the evacuation order was finally lifted and the center miraculously stood untouched by the fire, Hannah opened the crate back at their enclosure. Milo dashed out first, turning in clumsy circles. Nova followed, stretching as though she'd been cramped for years. Bruno stepped out last, inhaling deeply, surveying the familiar trees, the shelter, the stream. Then the kittens ran to him, not out of fear, not out of uncertainty, but out of certainty. The certainty that wherever he was, they belonged. And for the first time, when they leapt onto him, Bruno didn't sigh in despair. He only lowered his head and closed his eyes. Not annoyed, not grieving. Home. Autumn came early that year, brushing the Rocky Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center with gold before September had fully unfolded. The fire evacuation was behind them, but the weight of what came next pressed heavily on Hannah's shoulders. She had barely slept in weeks, not because of the chaos inside the center, but because of a letter waiting on her desk. A letter she dreaded and reread every morning. It was from the State Wildlife Oversight Division. Compliance inspection, September 14th. Focus, non-standard housing of native predators. Of course, the non-standard housing referred to Milo and Nova living with Bruno. What had started as a desperate decision to save 2 freezing kittens had become something bigger. Too big, in fact, to fit neatly inside any existing regulation. Bobcats were supposed to be raised in isolation from domestic animals, not curled like house pets against the ribs of a retired K9 who tolerated their ridiculous antics with saint-like patience. Yet no rule book could deny what everyone at the center had witnessed. This strange family functioned, and separating them now would break something none of them could repair. On the morning of the inspection, the air held a tense stillness. Leaves fluttered down from the aspens, scattering across the path like confetti from a celebration nobody wanted to attend. Hannah stood by the observation window, her arms crossed tightly, watching the trio in their enclosure. Milo was crouched on a branch above Bruno's back, tail twitching, preparing to ambush. Nova occupied her usual position, draped across Bruno's head like a dramatic feline hat, paws dangling over his brow. And Bruno. He looked as he always did, long-suffering, unamused, and deeply committed to this role he never applied for, but had come to embody. "Morning chaos," James muttered beside her. "Right on schedule." Hannah didn't laugh. "I'm worried the inspector won't understand." "He just has to watch them," James said. "Anyone with eyes can see what they are." But not everyone trusted what they saw. Regulations existed to protect wildlife from imprinting on humans, domestic animals, or each other in unnatural ways. Regulators wanted clean lines between species, not a dog raising bobcats like they were his own unruly toddlers. At precisely 9 o'clock, Inspector Raymond Hale arrived. He was quiet, older than Hannah expected, with eyes that carried the weight of someone who had spent decades enforcing rules that were often necessary but rarely easy. He introduced himself, then walked directly to the observation window. For nearly 3 minutes, he said nothing. Inside the enclosure, Milo leapt from the branch, landing squarely on Bruno's back. The big dog didn't even flinch. Nova slid down Bruno's forehead, using his nose as a ramp, then pounced on her brother. They tumbled away in a ball of spotted fur. Bruno sighed and followed them, a slow, heavy-footed guardian whose patience bordered on mythic. Inspector Hale set down his clipboard. "You know this is highly irregular." "Yes," Hannah replied, "and technically non-compliant with statewide predator handling protocols." "I know." He glanced at her. "But tell me why you continued it." Her throat tightened. She nodded for him to follow her to the conference room where she had prepared her documentation. Photos, medical records, behavioral reports, videos, everything organized with meticulous care. But the explanation didn't come from any of those papers. "When Bruno arrived," she said quietly, "he was dying. Not physically, but emotionally. He had lost his partner, his purpose, his will to live. For nearly 2 months, he barely moved. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, wouldn't respond." Hale listened, his eyes steady. "No treatment helped," she continued. "No medication, no therapy, no familiar sense. I came incredibly close to signing euthanasia papers." She paused, swallowing. And then, 2 terrified bobcat kittens arrived. They needed warmth, shelter, comfort. And even though I placed them there out of desperation, Bruno heard their cries, and something in him woke up. She showed Hale the footage from the storm, the moment Bruno rose from the ground, dragged the nesting box to safety, and curled around the kittens like a shield against the wind. Then she showed him the footage of early spring. The play, the protection, the teaching behaviors. The way Milo and Nova looked to him for direction. The way Bruno responded with a gentleness no one thought he still possessed. Hale was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "This goes far beyond tolerance." "Yes," Hannah replied. "They're bonded, deeply, and breaking. That bond would traumatize all 3. They are a family, not accidental, not incidental, intentional." He tapped his pen against the table. "You're asking for an exemption that doesn't currently exist. I'm asking you not to destroy them." Another long pause. Then he stood. "Show me the enclosure." When they reached the gate, the trio was resting near the stream. Milo was grooming Bruno's paw with exaggerated concentration. Nova was curled beneath Bruno's chin, half asleep. Bruno watched them both with the quiet, steady vigilance of a creature who knew exactly where his purpose lay. The inspector stepped closer. Bruno lifted his head, alert but calm. Nova chirped softly. Milo blinked with lazy confidence. Hale took in the scene. The bond, the ease, the impossible harmony. Finally, he sighed, not out of frustration, but something more resigned. "Dr. Lee, I can't pretend this is simple, but separating them would be cruel, and cruelty is not the purpose of regulation." Hannah held her breath. "I will file a recommendation," he said, "that the state create a special exemption category, allowing this trio to remain together under permanent sanctuary status." Her breath released in a shaky rush. "It won't be fast," he warned, "and it won't be easy. But I believe this case deserves protection." Tears blurred her vision. "Thank you." Months passed. Advocates rallied. Legislators debated. Wildlife experts testified. A documentary filmmaker caught wind of the story and helped share it with the world. Donations arrived from veterans, animal lovers, and people who simply believed in unexpected family. And then, just before winter set in again, the exemption was approved. Bruno, Milo, and Nova could stay together, legally, permanently. The day the notice arrived, the staff gathered by the enclosure. Milo and Nova darted through the leaves while Bruno watched, exhausted but content. Hannah knelt by the fence and whispered, "You're safe. All of you." Bruno looked at her with those deep, knowing eyes. Then Nova climbed onto his head. Milo grabbed his tail, and Bruno released one of his legendary, soul-deep groans. The world's grumpiest retired K9. The two bobcats who adopted him and the family fate tried to separate. But love refused to surrender. They were home, and they weren't going anywhere.